This is the 5-minute guide to the Bismarck-class battleships of the German Kriegsmarine. More detailed videos on the ship's careers will follow later. The Bismarck class started life in the early 1930s, when Germany was looking to reach beyond the limits of the Versailles Treaty and start to build ships on a par with the major navies of the world. This meant a design limited by the Washington Naval Treaty, and the first draft used the maximum 35,000 tons displacement to give a fast battleship capable of 30 knots and armed with 8 guns of 13-inch caliber. The armor protection would be extensive to compensate for the smaller size of the guns, but at the time it was not that much of a sacrifice as the main projected enemy, the French, did not have anything with heavier guns on the drawing board at the time. However, after having signed the Anglo-German Naval Agreement and realized France was expanding its navy to include battleships with 15-inch guns, the design was revised to match these weapons. But Germany had a problem. Thanks to the Versailles Treaty, their ship designers had no experience in the arts of modern battleship construction. The previous Scharnhorst class had essentially been modified versions of the last German battlecruiser designed from World War I, and in this case many principles were taken from the Bayern class of battleships, also from World War I. This would have a variety of effects, both good and bad, on the ship's careers and fates. The first result showed in the ship's basic design. The designers wanted a fast, long-range and stable gun platform, but could not come up with a way of working the design that kept within the treaty limits. Combined with Hitler's increasing disregard for international agreements, the design grew and grew until they would end up displacing about 50,000 tons at full load. This was far in excess of the treaty limits and showed the weaknesses in the Germans' design. For this weight they got a fast battleship armed with 4 twin turrets, a pair super-firing forward, and a pair super-firing aft. These were armed with modern 15-inch guns, and accompanied by 6 twin turrets containing 5.9-inch guns for a secondary battery and an anti-aircraft battery of 16 4.1-inch guns, 16 37mm guns and 12 20mm guns. The armor belt was 12.6 inches thick with a low-mounted armor deck that limited the ship's best protected space and would work well at close range, but was more vulnerable to longer-range fire. Additionally, because of these limitations, many vital communication, power, and supply lines were above the armor deck, which would play a significant part in the Bismarck's destruction. Whilst they were the largest battleships in the world until the end of 1941, they were not the most powerful. The HMS Hood was 4,000 tons lighter, but was faster, just as well armed, had a slightly better belt, and was only worse in deck armor, which was planned to be fixed in a refit, although of course that never happened. However, the Nagato, North Carolina, South Dakota and Nelson-class battleships had all been built to treaty specifications, and were all over 5,000 tons lighter at full load even after refits. Each of these classes was better armed, carrying 8 or 9 16-inch guns, with the exception of the North Carolina class much better armored, and with the exception of the Nelson class about as fast in normal conditions. 2 of these designs were also 20 years old. The Iowa class, which was then under construction, displaced about as much as the Bismarck at full load and was faster, better armed and better protected. This shows that whilst powerful, the Bismarck design was fairly inefficient in its use of the available displacement and still contained weaknesses. These are best illustrated in the ship's careers, which both span a few years of the Second World War. Bismarck herself planned to raid the Atlantic alongside the Tirpitz and the Scharnhorst class. But between delays in construction and damage from British attacks, the other 3 ships were not ready in time, and it had to sail with the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen instead. This reduced force met the HMS Hood and Prince of Wales in the Denmark Strait, where excellent German shooting destroyed the Hood and damaged the Prince of Wales in short order. However, the shock of her own guns firing disabled the Bismarck's main ranging radar set, reducing the ship's accuracy unless it could be fixed. Further, a 14-inch shell from the Prince of Wales defeated the armor protection and put a hole in the ship that breached a fuel tank and knocked out a generator and boiler room. Faced with reduced speed, fuel and flooding, the mission was called off and the ship headed for home. Under torpedo attack, the anti-torpedo defenses held up well, protecting the ship from major damage until one managed to disable a rudder, leaving the ship unable to run. Now the ship had to face the HMS King George V and the HMS Rodney. Although initially the Bismarck's gunnery looked good, the low armor deck design weakness rapidly came into play as 16-inch shells from the Rodney destroyed most of the ship's fire control system, as multiple vital communication and supply lines were above the main armor deck and severed by shell fragments, even though the armor deck managed to stop these from entering the magazines and engine rooms. This left the turrets operating under local control with reduced aiming equipment, made worse by the Rodney then proceeding to obliterate the bridge and primary fire control station with one shell, then knock out the forward turrets with another, utterly destroying the super-firing Bruno turret in the process. Further shellfire soon destroyed the aft fire director and the ship's main armament was effectively out of action. Ironically, because the British took the chance to close in for the kill, to improve accuracy, they actually made the job harder for themselves. Whilst the HMS Rodney had effectively destroyed the Bismarck as a fighting unit at long range, due to the ship being designed for close-range combat, the subsequent hail of fire failed to do much more than rearrange the existing wreckage before the ship eventually sank. Unfortunately, although Tirpitz was completed to a modified design that addressed some of these weaknesses, she would never see action against another ship. After being moved to Norway, she was instead subjected to increasing air raids and attacks by Midget submarines until eventually Royal Air Force Lancasters hit her with 12,000-pound supersonic tall boy bombs, something no battleship was designed for, and she was sunk in the fjord she was sheltering in. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for another video, let us know below.